It's December 2003. The Houston Rockets are setting up their offense, thinking they have a clear lane to the basket, but out of nowhere, a 6'9" shadow erases the shot. A few possessions later, that same shadow jumps a passing lane for a steal. Then he drops a dime. Then he hits a three. 19 points, 5 rebounds, 7 assists, 8 steals, and 5 blocks, all in a single night. It's a stat line that looks like a typo in a video game. In the entire 75-plus year history of the NBA, the 5x5, which consists of recording at least 5 points, rebounds, assists, steals, and blocks in a single game, has only happened 23 times. Hakeem Olajuwon did it 6 times, ranking first on the list. And sitting right behind the legendary Dream on the all-time list, a skinny buzz-cut forward from Russia named Andrei Kirilenko. We love to obsess over the unicorns of today's NBA. We praise guys who can guard 1 through 5 and fill up the box score. But Andrei Kirilenko, the man they called AK-47, was doing things 20 years ago that would break modern analytics today. In the 2003 to 2004 season, at just 22 years old, he dragged a depleted Utah Jazz team to the brink of the playoffs, averaging 16.5 points, 8.1 rebounds, 3.1 assists, nearly 2 steals, and 2.8 blocks. The following year, he led the entire NBA in blocks with 3.3 per game. Let that sink in for a minute. A small forward was the most effective rim protector in basketball during an era ruled by Shaquille O'Neal and Tim Duncan. He remains the only non-center in NBA history to lead the league in blocks. If you look at the advanced analytics, the numbers are genuinely terrifying. At his peak, AK-47 boasted a player efficiency rating of 22 and amassed over 50 defensive win shares in his career. He was the runner-up for Defensive Player of the Year in 2006. He was, by every mathematical measure, one of the most impactful two-way players to ever touch a basketball. But despite being a walking cheat code, Kirilenko remains one of the most underutilized and criminally underrated superstars in NBA history. He was a free-flowing, positionless basketball genius who had the severe misfortune of landing in the most rigid, old-school half-court system in the league at the time. He wasn't just battling opposing teams, he was battling the very era and system he played in. Andrei Kirilenko didn't just fade away, he was suffocated. To understand how the NBA misused Andrei Kirilenko, we have to go back to the environment that forged him. Born in the Urals region and raised in St. Petersburg, Andrei's DNA was literally coded for athletics. His father was a football player and his mother was a professional basketball player. By the time he was 10 years old, while most kids were just learning the rules of the game, Andrei was already dedicating his life to it. And then, in January 1997, Andrei did the unthinkable. At just 15 years old, he made his professional debut for Spartak St. Petersburg. He was a child playing in a grown man's league, officially becoming the youngest player in the history of the Russian Super League. He only scored 3 points that night, but the sheer audacity of a lanky teenager taking the floor against hardened, physical European pros sent shockwaves through the continent. He wasn't a novelty act either. A year later, he transferred to the historic powerhouse, CSKA Moscow. Over the next few seasons, he didn't just survive in the top tier of Russian basketball, he conquered it, helping his squad capture multiple Russian championships. His combination of alien-like length, hyperactive defense, and a basketball IQ that felt years ahead of his age was impossible to ignore. Soon, scouts from across the Atlantic started whispering about a Russian prodigy who could do absolutely everything on the court. In 1999, the Utah Jazz took a massive, calculated gamble. With the 24th overall pick, they selected the 18-year-old Kirilenko, but the Jazz had a master plan. Rather than just throwing him immediately into the meat grinder of the NBA, they stashed him in Russia for 2 more years to let his body and his game mature. It was a slow burn that built incredible anticipation. When Andrei finally arrived in Salt Lake City for the 2001 to 2002 season, he was 20 years old and ready to unleash absolute chaos. In his rookie year, he played all 82 games, averaging 10 points and nearly 2 blocks a game coming off the bench. He easily secured NBA All-Rookie First-Team honors. Jazz fans fell in love instantly. For an aging franchise clinging to the last day of the Stockton to Malone era, Kirilenko was a spark plug of pure adrenaline. The legendary AK-47 moniker was born, not just because of his initials and his jersey number, but because of the lethal, rapid-fire impact he had the very second his sneakers touched the floor. In the summer of 2003, the ground beneath Salt Lake City completely caved in. For nearly 2 decades, the Utah Jazz have been defined by a singular, unbreakable identity, John Stockton and Karl Malone, but suddenly, it was over. Stockton announced his retirement. Malone chased a ring with the Lakers. The greatest pick-and-roll duo in the history of basketball vanished, leaving behind a massive, terrifying void. Every analyst and fan expected the Utah Jazz to absolutely crater. They were projected to be bottom feeders, entering a long, dark rebuilding phase. But they overlooked the 22-year-old Russian forward who had been waiting in the shadows. It was time for the Jazz to hand the keys to the franchise over to a kid. It was time to fully unleash the weapon. Andrei Kirilenko, initialed AK, jersey number 47. We all know the nickname, AK-47. It's arguably the toughest nickname in NBA history, but the poetry of this nickname goes so much deeper than a surface-level coincidence. The freezing industrial city of Izhevsk, where Andrei was born, is the exact city of the historical birthplace of the actual AK-47 assault rifle, engineered by Mikhail Kalashnikov in 1947. Fate didn't just give Kirilenko a catchy nickname, it literally created him in the exact same place as the world's most infamous weapon. And in that 2003 to 2004 season, he played exactly like one. Thrust into the role of a franchise player at just 22 years old, Kirilenko didn't just step up, he completely shattered the ceiling. Night after night, he was a one-man wrecking crew on both ends of the floor. Over 78 games, he averaged 16.5 points, 8.1 rebounds, 3.1 assists, nearly 2 steals, and a staggering 2.8 blocks per game. He didn't just lead the Utah Jazz in scoring, he led them in rebounds, and steals, and blocks. He was the entire system. He was an absolute terror on defense, ultimately earning all NBA second defensive team honors and leading the entire league in blocks per game. Against all mathematical odds, this 22-year-old dragged a roster of role players to a 42-40 record. In the absolute bloodbath that was the Western Conference, the Jazz finished ninth, missing the playoffs by the slimmest of margins. No one could believe it. Utah wasn't supposed to win 20 games, let alone 42. And for his superhuman efforts, the kid from Izhevsk was named an NBA All-Star. The future in Salt Lake City didn't just look bright, it looked revolutionary. But revolutions are messy. And in Utah, Andrei Kirilenko was about to collide with an immovable object. The honeymoon was over, and the friction was just beginning. Basketball is a game of rhythm, and Andrei Kirilenko played it like a jazz musician, ironically. He was improvising, cutting, finding passing lanes, and roaming the floor with absolute freedom. But head coach Jerry Sloan didn't want jazz. He wanted a sympathy orchestra playing classical sheet music perfectly, every single time. And that sheet music was the rigid half-court pick-and-roll offense. When the Jazz acquired Carlos Boozer and drafted Deron Williams, Sloan reverted immediately back to what he knew best, the Stockton to Malone 2.0 blueprint. Suddenly, the most versatile, positionless weapon in the NBA was relegated to being a highly paid spot-up shooter in the corner. His offensive creativity was completely suffocated. Years later, Kirilenko would admit that he had literal nightmares from Sloan's practices, saying he disliked everything about the system, even crying once after practice because he felt so lost in all of it. That tension boiled over in the summer of 2007. After a frustrating season where he felt like a glorified role player, Kirilenko did the unthinkable. He publicly demanded a trade, calling Sloan's offensive system robotic. It was a massive scandal in Salt Lake City. The rift was so deep that legendary Jazz owner Larry Miller had to personally intervene. Miller marched into Sloan's office, practically begging the stubborn coach to make a reasonable adjustment, bluntly reminding him that AK-47 was one of the 10 best players in the league. Sloan simply replied, "I hold myself accountable," but the damage to AK's spirit was already done. But a robotic offensive system wasn't the only thing that was breaking Andrei Kirilenko. His own body was about to betray him. And honestly, it was inevitable. You cannot play with that level of recklessness, throwing a slender 220-pound frame into the airspace of massive 260-pound big men without eventually paying the ultimate price. AK-47 played every defensive possession like his life depended on it. He didn't care who was driving to the rim. Shaq, Kobe, Duncan. he was going up to meet them. But in the 2004 to 2005 season, that fearlessness caught up to him in devastating fashion. In a game against the Washington Wizards, Kirilenko went up for a contest, got tangled in the air, and came crashing down hard on his right arm. It was a clean break of both the radius and the ulna bones in his right wrist. The injury sidelined him for the entire second half of the season. He played only 41 games that year. But here is the most insane, terrifying testament to how dominant he was. Despite missing half the season, he still led the entire NBA in blocks per game with 3.3. He still made the all-defensive second team. He did in 41 games what most good defenders couldn't do in 82. That wrist injury was the first domino to fall for Andrei. From that point on, the injuries piled up like a cruel tax for his style of play, with severe back spasms, sprained ankles, and knee issues. Between the physical trauma and the systemic suffocation of Jerry Sloan's offense, the alien we saw in 2004 slowly began to vanish right before our eyes. The stats dipped. The explosive blocks became less frequent. The NBA had broken the Russian Prodigy. History is entirely dictated by timing. For Andrei Kirilenko, his greatest tragedy wasn't the injuries, and it wasn't clashing with Jerry Sloan. It was simply being born 15 years too early. He was a beta test for the future of basketball, dropped into an era that had absolutely no idea how to use him. Imagine taking a prime 22-year-old AK-47 and dropping him into today's pace and space NBA. In a league that completely adores positionless basketball, Kirilenko wouldn't just be an all-star, he would be a perennial MVP candidate. Just think about it. He possessed the defensive IQ and switching ability of Draymond Green, but with a 7'4" wingspan. He had the shot-blocking instincts of a modern unicorn, combined with the perimeter lateral quickness of an elite wing defender. In a modern 5-out offense, he wouldn't be stuck in the corner watching a slow pick and roll. He would be the ultimate read and react weapon, a roll man who could catch lobs, a secondary playmaker who can initiate the fast break off a rebound, and a slashing nightmare with a completely open painted area. Defensively, in an era where teams switch 1 through 5, Kirilenko is the ultimate cheat code. He could seamlessly clamp a guard on the perimeter for 20 seconds, and then swat a big man shot to the third row on the very same possession. Andrei Kirilenko vanished from the mainstream NBA consciousness because the system broke him before the era could catch up to him. He was a 6'9" Swiss Army knife in a league that was still demanding everybody be a sword. We look back at his legendary 5x5 games as statistical anomalies, but they weren't anomalies, they were a prophecy. The next time you watch a 6'9" forward quickly switch onto a point guard, block a three-pointer, and then run the floor to throw down a transition dunk, take a moment to remember the Russian Prodigy. Remember the weapon forged in Izhevsk, because long before the NBA knew what the future looked like, Andrei Kirilenko was already living in it. Thank you for watching Court Chronicles. If you want to uncover more untold stories and massive what-ifs that shape basketball history, hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment below. If you dropped prime AK-47 into today's league, how great would he be, and how many rings is he winning? I'll see you in the next deep dive.